Hey, small town fam. It's Yeardley. How are you guys? I hope you're all well and thriving. I sure do. Our case today is unusual in every way. Our guest is Detective Constable Garry from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP as they're also known. Last season, Garry gave us an episode we called Your Worst Nightmare. If you haven't heard it, holy shit, it will scare you to death. For the most part, the cases we cover on Small Town Dicks are about crime in, guess what, small towns, or sometimes small cities. But today's case happens in such a remote area of North America that the nearest town is hours away by snowmobile. In this cold, unforgiving place, which is nestled on the border between northwest British Columbia and the Yukon Territory, the weather is extreme and unpredictable. The few people who live off the land there regularly wear snowshoes. They have dogsleds, and they trap, hunt, and fish for their food. This case that Garry brings us takes place in March 1985, on the cusp of spring, though the change of seasons is nowhere in sight in these parts. And it's against this backdrop that Garry and his colleagues head out into the merciless wilderness to track down an American expat named Oris, who is armed, paranoid, and extremely dangerous. This is a harrowing tale of the best laid plans going awry. It's one of courage and loss, but also luck, which, when all was said and done, sure looked to me like divine intervention. But you decide. Here is Lying in Wait. Hi there, I'm Yeardley.
I'm Dan.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Paul.
And this is Small Town Dicks.
Dave and I are identical twins.
And retired detectives from Small Town, USA.
And I'm a veteran cold case investigator who helped catch the Golden State Killer using a revolutionary DNA tool.
Between the three of us, we've investigated thousands of crimes, from petty theft to sexual assault, child abuse to murder.
Each case we cover is told by the detective who investigated it, offering a rare, personal account of how they solved the crime.
Names, places, and certain details have been changed to protect the privacy of victims and their families.
And although we're aware that some of our listeners may be familiar with these cases, we ask you to please join us in continuing to protect the true identities of those involved
out of respect for what they've been through. Thank you.
Today on Small Town Dicks, we have most of the usual suspects. We have the one and only Paul Holes.
Oh, hi. You caught me.
Caught him off guard. And we have Detective Dan.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. We do not have Detective Dave. Detective Dave is under the weather today, so we told him to rest up and not barf all over the microphone, which we all appreciate, but certainly wish him well. And Small Town fam, we are so pleased to welcome back to the podcast Detective Constable Garry.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Garry. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're delighted to see you.
Pleasure. It's fun.
So, Garry, tell us how this case came to you.
Okay, this case is deeply personal to me because I lost my partner and best friend beside me, was shot to death in a very tragic, almost supernatural situation. So you're going to have to bear with me while I set the stage for this. The story goes back to the late 70s, early 1980s. There was a man by the name of Michael Eugene Oris. I'm going to call him Oris from now on. He was a true bushman, had no fixed home, lived off the land. Oris was also an American. He was in a legal status in Canada. He'd been a draft dodger and made his way to Alaska in the 70s, wore out his welcome there and settled through the Yukon, right at the northern British Columbia-Yukon border in the Chesley area is where he settled in. And over a course of about 13 years, Oris descended into a complete state of paranoia and madness. And he was loose wandering the bush. He was known to have killed at least one man, Gunter, and thought to be responsible for the disappearance of a number of other people who just vanished. Oris lived like an animal. In the early 1980s, a team not including me went in to arrest Oris for the murder of Gunther. They're lucky they didn't lose some people on that. So when Oris was first arrested for Gunther's murder, he was squatting in a cabin. The police officers there went in on a disguise that they were a survey party. So it didn't look like cops. It looked like a survey party, and got dropped off a helicopter. They started branching out to his cabin with survey rods and whatnot. And so Oris got a little curious. So Oris came out of the cabin, and Oris realized what was happening, made a run for it, and the whole works of them tackled him. They roped him to stabilize him. They had this all planned out. Matter of fact, they had those nylon straps with the metal ratchets to tighten him up. Yeah, they hogtied him with that.
They hogtied Oris.
Yeah, they hogtied him. They hauled him into a helicopter that they had waiting, flew him straight to the community terrace, and had a special cell prepared for him. They actually hauled him in and put him in the cell with the ratchet straps on. And then they cut him loose. And a few hours later, Oris was going crazy in the cell and smashing the porcelain sink that was in there. And it just happens that Bood was in the police office. So Bood was my partner, Mike Budai. We call him Bood. Bood, not to get confused between Mike Oris and Mike Budai. Bood was a muscle man. He was about 5'10", 240 pounds, solid muscle, extremely good shape, amazing eyesight, hearing, and just a hell of an all-around good guy. Bood was in the police office, and Bood's the only guy that's tough enough to take him on. And so Bood went in a cell and had a physical fight with him until he got him down, and they put Oris in a straitjacket. And when he was going to court, they had to keep him in a straitjacket. Oris was brought in for trial on charges of murder, but it was a habeas corpus issue. There was no body. And ultimately, the only thing Oris was convicted of was being in possession of Gunther's revolver and his camera. The courts took pity on Oris because he'd never been convicted of anything before. It was his first offense.
So, Gary, when Oris was tried, they didn't deport him back to the U.S.?
No, they didn't. Nobody can explain why that didn't happen because he's not a Canadian citizen. They just had a quick trial. Judge says no body, no evidence. You're out.
And I'm curious that Oris stayed quiet enough in order for a trial to take place.
From what I know, he wasn't really a boisterous guy. He was more ramblings, mutterings, but he wasn't one of these screaming, yelling, raving lunatics. Not that I got the picture of. So when he was released from the trial, one day I encountered Oris.
And when you encountered Oris, did you know who he was?
I had no idea who he was. I was traveling on the west end of the community terrace where I was stationed. I was in plain clothes in an unmarked car, and I saw this wild-looking guy, the hair, the beard, the rattered clothes, and out standing on the side of the road hitchhiking. I stopped and said, police, got any ID on you? Who are you? And he had his pack, like a big old trapper's canvas pack in front of him. As he was standing there, he kept moving the pack in front of him between him and me. And I said, what do you got in the pack? He was just mumbling. And I said, do you have any ID? No. Well, what's your name? He was just sort of mumbling incoherent stuff, but he gave me enough of his name. He didn't try to hide who he was. Michael Eugene Oris. And he just kept looking at me, and I'm just getting bad vibes from this guy. I don't know who he is, I don't know what he's up to, but I don't like it. And so I went back to the police car on the radio, and I said, dispatch, can I get a 29 on, which means can you run his name through the computer system, 29 on a Michael Eugene Oris, age about maybe 50. And there was a silence, and one of the cars broke in and says, are you with him? And I said, yeah, I got him here at the West End, and he's hitchhiking, and I'm just doing a routine check on him. I said, just stay right there. We'll be right there. So the next thing, I got some backup, knowing how dangerous this guy is. And while this was going on, Oris says to me, I could kill you. I says, well, let's just put an end to that right here. I could kill you too, and I'm armed. It was almost radiating some sort of a sign of vibes off him, craziness, just craziness. We searched his pack, and there was no firearms in there. He came back with the story that he was released from jail. He was acquitted, and he was free to go. So let him go. I still think that Oris should have been sent to the Psychiatric Institute during this time and at least get some sort of a stabilizing medication in him. But they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't do it.
Yeah, don't just release him. Do something.
Yeah, he just slipped through the cracks. And after the trial, they said they gave him some bail, said be back, and he just disappeared and truly lived off the land. He did not have any possessions other than what he could steal by raiding cabins, poaching game, surviving outdoors in 40 to 50 below weather, tough as nails. But he developed into a pure paranoid schizophrenic, and Oris kept diaries. and he documented his descent into paranoia.
Really?
Yes. He was imagining that the authorities like the CIA were tracking him, spraying him with drugs from the air, call them sneak-arounds. He'd shoot at imaginary voices and beings, and all this was documented in his own extensive diaries. And then March 1985, I was on the Serious Crimes Unit detective in northern British Columbia. A side role that I had was on the emergency response team, or what the Americans call SWAT. So ERT, emergency response team. I was an assaulter and also a sniper sharpshooter with the emergency response team. We practiced several days a month. And one time we did a scenario thinking we might have to go after this Oris guy in the bush sometime, so let's do some training. And then on March 18th, 1985, call came in that Oris was in a cabin at the north end, right about the BC-Yukon border. The owner had come to check on it. Oris, he'd trashed it. He'd been living in there for several months. He had a dead moose inside the cabin. He was just hacking pieces of the carcass off to feed himself.
Ugh.
Yeah. So the trapper went back in a snowmobile about 80 miles back north to the town of Teslin, Yukon, and reported it to the Teslin RCMP that Oris was now wanted for break and enter, theft, vandalism.
Gary, did the trapper who discovered Oris squatting in his cabin, did he know that was Oris? Did he, I know who that is?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he did?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Everybody up there knew Oris. Yeah. The trapper came down and he saw Oris leaving his cabin on the dog sled. He was pulling out. He pulled in and just found his place trashed with this moose carcass in the middle of the floor. Oris had even chopped out some of the boards off the walls in the floor to build a fire with. And he's really torqued about this. And he knew Oris. And so he left a note for him. Says, I'm going for the police. You're not getting away with it. I saw you. I know you did this. So you can expect to hear from the police. So yeah, Oris was waiting for the police. He finally decided he was going to have the big shootout.
Wow. Did he have firearms or did he have more like a bow and arrow?
No, firearms stolen. British 303, 12-gauge shotgun, and a sawed-off .22 rifle. And the British 303 is a First and Second World War British Army rifle. That's the standard issue to the British, Canadian, Australian folks. It's darn near a foolproof weapon, deadly and foolproof. So the RCMP went out in an airplane to fly over to have a look at this, and there was Oris standing on a rock. And Oris, he opened fire in the airplane. They didn't hit the plane, but certainly spooked the guys. So the guys said, we can't arrest Oris. It's too dangerous for just regular police officers. The ERT's got to go in, the emergency response team. I had been trained on several things in the early 1980s, back when I was young and stupid and in really good shape. So I was designated both an assaulter, a sniper. So I was actually very proficient with weapons. So yeah, I was competent with a firearm. And so was my partner, Bood. And Bood was also a dog master in training. So he had a young dog by the name of Trooper. So we put together 2 ERT teams, a total of about 14 people, and broke them into 3 squads. 2 squads, each with a police dog. One was a very experienced dog handler and a very competent dog. The other was Bood, who was a junior dog handler and with just a young dog in training. Trooper was certified, but was a really young dog. So the idea was we knew that we had a surveillance plane into the air, a better equipped plane after Oris shot at the first one. We put a second one up with gyro equipment to keep an eye on him.
What's gyro equipment?
Oh, a gyro is a stabilized optic equipment that goes in airplanes for surveillance. It's like a telescope, but no matter what the plane is doing, the gyro stays straight, so you constantly get a perfectly clear view, regardless of what the airplane's doing. You just aim it at the target.
I see.
The plan was we knew Oris had left the cabin and was out traveling southbound. He was traveling by dog sled. He had 2 dogs pulling a sleigh. We knew he was armed because he'd already shot at the plane. And they got a good enough look at him when they flew over to see not only who it was, but when he was holding a rifle. And they were pretty sure it was a British 303. They got that good of a look at it. So we put together 3 teams of 3 for preliminary and had 3 helicopters, chartered helicopters. So the idea was squad 1 with myself, Bood, and another fellow by the name of Paul were to go in to the south end to cut him off and establish a front line. A second team, also with a dog, they were go to the bush line to the north. And then the third team was to go out on the open ice. And the whole idea was to push him from a distance and contain him into a point where Oris could be dealt with. Perfect world, should have worked. But it didn't. So I describe this as going on probably the biggest game hunt in the world. We're going after somebody with the intelligence of a human, the cunning of an animal, armed with a rifle. He's on his own turf, and he's completely bent on killing anybody that comes close to him. We put our teams together to be able to get transferred down into the Teslin Lake area. This is the name of the lake that it took place at. And forever since then, the whole thing's been known as the Teslin Lake Incident. Now, myself, Bood, and Paul, we had to fly 90 miles in the first helicopter, and it's in completely wild area. There's no civilization in here whatsoever.
And just to set the scene of this territory that you guys are in and that you're operating in trying to find Oris, you said the complainant on the burglary of the cabin rode his snowmobile 80 miles to the nearest town.
Right.
We're talking like there's maybe one person every 5 square miles.
Oh, not even that. No, the only settlements are right along the Alaska Highway up there, just the little gas station stops. That's it. The biggest center up there is Whitehorse in Yukon. It's a government territorial center. It's about 25,000 people, something. But there's little cabins dotted all through there. People got their trap lines or their getaways or hunting, fishing camps. The resident population is next to nothing. Just miles and miles. I've flown over it, and what looks like pastures are actually water lily swamps, and it looks like herds of cattle out, and it's moose. This looks like you're flying over a farm with all those moose down there.
That's incredible.
Then you got bears.
Big bears.
I just want to hug the bears. Dan always says, don't hug the bears, Yeardley.
Not hug the bears. They don't hug back.
They'd hug me. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
So when we finally got within range, we got the first look at him. Oris stands right out. Here's this dark object with a dog sled, and it's headed south. He's between a stretch of forest and a stretch of open water, and it's headed towards a small point of land. See, it's a narrowing of the lake, which is actually a big river. And Oris can't go through the open water. So Oris was committed to this long stretch, would probably be about 5 miles, and he was approaching this point. But he was still a good close to a mile back from the point. And we knew that, okay, this is a perfect place because we can set down at that point, get dug in, get stationary, and create what's referred to as a buzzsaw. So it's a triangular shape to contain something so that no matter what angle, we all have a shot at the target. And because we're dug in, Oris can't either see us or he can't get a shot at us because I'm behind a big tree, Paul's behind some brush out at the point, and Bood is just in the start of the thickets, and he's got the dog. So when Oris came after us, we were going to use a loud hailer to order him, police, Oris, you're under arrest. We had a warrant sworn for him, by the way, so we had the powers of arrest. If he took any hostile action, we knew how dangerous this man was. And the word is neutralized, but we'd shoot him. We'd have no choice. Now, the second team was a little late, and they got behind him and got into position, but Oris kept moving south, maybe 5 miles an hour or something like that, based on the two dogs pulling a fairly heavy sled and him on snowshoes.
Did the second team intend to get in behind Oris, or were they trying to get ahead of him as well?
No, they were trying to get behind him. We wanted to corner him. We wanted to have a visible pressure pushing him forward, and invisible ahead to intercept him. We didn't want to push Oris into the bush.
I see.
And then the third team, they didn't anticipate that stretch open water, so they also set down just further behind it. They were almost useless at the point. So I had about 100 rounds on me. I had an M16 with a .223, and Bood had exactly the same thing, an M16 with the same amount of rounds. Plus we packed our handguns, which are 9mm. So the idea was to try to keep Oris on the ice and close in on him, get within shooting range, sniping range, order him to surrender. We had the two dogs there in case he got into the bush. Now, we were dealing wintertime, frozen lake, probably 4 feet of snow in the bush line, but the lake was frozen up. There's a crust that you could travel quite fast on it. This is a beautiful day. It's hardly a cloud in the sky. Cold, but probably temperature about 0.
0 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Celsius, about 32 Fahrenheit. I'm in Canada, so we use the metric system. And it was 5 minutes to 12 and not a breath of wind. Clear, sunny. In fact, it was so warm that I didn't even have mitts on.
Really? And was that typical for a March day?
No, that would be a little bit more warmer than usual. The ice doesn't come off the lakes up there until almost July.
But it's pretty dense forest around you?
It is on the woods side. We were partly on the open lake, and the point that we were on moved from heavily dense evergreen into a scrub brush. and out at the point was pretty much open except for some low brush. So I'm stationary with a great view out. I'm behind a big tree, a big deciduous tree, and it's got no leaves on it, obviously, at that time of the year. Bood is about 50 feet to my left, and I'm facing north at Oris, who's coming at us southbound. So it sets it up. And Paul is over to my right side, or the east side, and he's got a 308 7.62 sniper rifle with him. So I've got the loud healer in the center. Paul's got a consistent bead on him.
Paul has a bead on Oris?
Yeah, but Oris is too far away to take the shot. He was about 500 yards away from us at this point. Oris was too far away to do anything. We had radios between us with earpieces, so we could communicate no problem back and forth between us all. And we had a repeater, which was up in the spotter aircraft, which the spotter aircraft was circling, but high enough to be invisible, but high enough to be out of gun range. So now stuff started to go sideways on us. The spotter plane was running low on fuel. He says, guys, I got to leave you here. I got to head back for fuel. So now he's taken out of the picture and we don't have the repeater. We can talk between the three team members, but we can't talk to the other team. They're too far away without the repeater. And I can't see Bood. He's over about 50 feet to my left, but I know he's there. So I said to Bood, just watch your flank there. I think this guy's doing something. And sure enough, Oris just stopped his sled about 500 yards from us. And he went to the edge of the tree line. He was there for a couple of minutes. And then he came back out. He went back to his dog sled. And he took a second pair of snowshoes. He went back into the tree line and lost visibility. This is about 500 yards out. And I can't see Oris. And Paul's got a better angle. And Paul says, I can't see him either. He's doing something in the bush. And I said, Bood, watch your flank. Oris is doing something. He might be coming at us. Bood says, I got it under control. Because he's got a dog there. And that was partly the reason for the dog, not for an attack so much, but for extra senses, for the hearing and the smell. So about 5 minutes goes by, and I'm watching. I haven't seen him. And I said, Bood, I haven't seen him. Watch your flank. Yep, got her under control. And then another maybe 5 minutes went by, and I started to get a really spooky feeling. There's just something's wrong here. I turned slightly to my left, and this figure started to materialize. I'm starting to see this glow of an orange face and this reddish hair, this beard. I'm starting to see this materialize through this wash of twigs and branches. So Oris was standing there. He'd circled us. In about 10 minutes, he made it about 500 yards on snowshoes to circle around behind us and stalk us like animals. And he was standing there. And I said, Bood, he's right behind you. And bang, right with that, Oris fired and he shot Bood through the back of the neck and killed him.
Oh my God.
And I'm watching this, and I've described this a number of times. It was like time slowing down. It was like I had all the time in the world. I almost felt like I was sitting on a branch of the tree above me watching this thing take place. And I instinctively turned. I could see the motions on Oris of working the bolt on the rifle. I know what's going on. Oris shot Bood. He's reloading. He's coming for me. And as I turned, I did an instinctive shot with my M16. Pow, one round go. Oris just disappeared. And now I started to get back in reality as to what's happened. And I said, Bood. And I called him. Bood, Bood, Bood. Nothing. And I knew what happened. Now, Oris has disappeared and he's armed. He's going to sneak around. He's going to come at me. I'm a sitting duck. So what we did was held until the team from the north followed Oris's tracks. So they put one member ahead moving and then two back to cover, then one cover while the others moved, and they followed his tracks around and they saw where Oris had come through the deep snow to Bood's left. And Oris passed by about 20 feet from Bood and then circled so that he could then pick up on our tracks and could see where we jumped off from the helicopter and the three descending tracks. So Oris knew there were three of us. So as he followed, he obviously looked at the biggest threat, and that was the member with the dog. And he didn't shoot the dog. He went for me next. Oris shot Bood and reloaded his British .303. He then turned, he reloaded it. Oris pointed at me and he pulled the trigger. And his round didn't go off. The round failed, even though the firing pin hit the primer and dented the primer, but it didn't ignite the round and allowed me time to return fire and kill him. My bullet hit him square in the top of the forehead and killed Oris.
After you shot Oris, did you go check on Bood?
Yeah. I knew that when I was calling him, he wasn't responding. And then I could hear Trooper, his dog, whining, and then could see Trooper starting to move around. I knew that it's obvious what happened. Toughest thing I've ever done is have to put my partner and best friend in a body bag. That's not fun.
You've got a family. What was it like when you came home that night?
I was about 5 days before I got back. We had to do a debriefing. We had to wait. They took Bood. Obviously, I had to autopsy him, but it took a while to get him out and back. So we just stayed tight. So I think it was 4 or 5 days when I got home. My wife was very supportive, always has been. So I came home to a good, solid support. And then the RCMP was very good to all of us. They had us all psychologically assessed. I went on a regular monitoring program every couple of months. I have to go and see a psychologist and just for follow-up. But I was okay. And I was cleared of all wrongdoing, that my shot was justified. That has to be looked into because I took the life of another human being. So there was just no dispute whatsoever that what I did was not only in self-defense, but was for our team members' protection. It had to be done.
Now, how far away were you when you took the shot that killed Oris?
44 feet, which isn't very far.
It is if it were a handgun, or at least if it was me shooting a handgun. So, did Oris have military training?
No, none whatsoever. He was a draft dodger through the Vietnam War. He took off into the bush to avoid it.
Oh, that's right. So he just naturally was tactically sound then.
Yeah. He was a bushman. He lived off the land for 13 years before this happened. He just went crazier and crazier, but his bush skills to survive was amazing. Yeah, how he was able to go from that about 500 yards in chest-deep snow in about 10 minutes and circle around us, that's a superhuman ability on its own. I never followed Oris's track through the woods, but these guys that did said, you wouldn't believe how easily he moved around through the trees on the snowshoes. It's almost like walking through a parking lot on a dry day. And the aftermath, of course, we had to have a coroner's inquest, and there was a lot of interest. Like, what happened up there? Bood was so popular that nobody could believe that he was killed. That's one of the things that I felt so safe about, that I was with him because of his abilities. Bood protecting my flank with the dog. I'm in no danger here at all, and we're all armed, and it didn't happen.
That's devastating. Garry, what happened in the investigation? Were they able to find out anything more about Oris?
The next year, once Oris was gone and out of the picture, there was a police team went into the Chesley area to a place called Hutsagola Lake. Well, they knew that Gunter's cabin was there, and we had pictures of Oris there with Gunter on the camera that Gunter had, and Oris had in his possession at the time of trial. So we could put them together. But they were too afraid with Oris on the loose to actually go look for the body. It was too dangerous to go into any place with Oris on the loose. Everybody knew this was a total madman. So what they did after Oris's death, they thought, okay, what's he going to do with the body? He's probably going to dump it in the lake. And they found a skeleton wrapped in a plastic tarp, and it was forensically identified as Gunter. And it had a .30 caliber bullet hole through the sternum from the back to the front. So there was an inquest on that too, and it was ruled that Oris was responsible for the murder of Gunter. They waited about a year to have the inquest. They wanted to get the whole psychological picture out of this thing and try to learn something. As partly the purpose of an inquest is to learn from the incident and hopefully try to train people and minimize the chance of something like that happening again. So it was really of interest on the psychological end of it that they try to build a profile of him. And then eventually all of his diaries were assembled. There's a book written about him after called Descent into Madness, which is written by actually a friend of mine, a prosecutor by the name of Vernon Frolick. And as a result of all that information, then Vern Frolick was able to accurately write the book. And it's a really fascinating read. Oris predicted his death, and it was documented in his diaries. Called us all pigs and piggies, and the vernacular of the day for cops. Going to kill as many pigs as I can, and when I die at the great shootout.
Did Oris talk about other crimes he'd committed, or was it mostly just ramblings and paranoia?
The only reference to that was one of Gunther's, and he was rambling on about Gunther being in his territory. He didn't say anything about killing him or intention. His was all killing imaginary The sneak-arounds is what he called them. They were the agents of the state that were out to get him, poisoning his food, spraying from the air with drugs, and, complete nonsense, but this was where this guy's head was at. So, in my view, when he came after us, we were just the manifestations of the sneak-arounds. And there we are, dressed in white snow camouflage gear. So, that's what we must have looked like to him.
What happened to the diaries?
They stayed in police evidence, and I believe they were sent to the RCMP Museum in Regina at the Training Academy because it's such a high-profile Canadian case. On things like that, generally, they go to the archives. But Vern was able to get photocopies of all the diaries. I still have some of them kicking around here.
Incredible.
Did they ever find if Oris actually had like a settlement? Did he have any place, and I'm sure it's different in the winter, you have to kind of move around a little bit, but in the summer, did he have a cabin or did he build anything that was kind of his headquarters?
No. As far as I know, he never built anything at all. He'd just lay off the land or break into cabins whenever he was necessary. But he would sleep outdoors in, 40, 50 below. Yeah.
I'm just picturing a guy, you mentioned he's got this big orange beard. And I'm picturing a guy with like a bear fur coat. Is that accurate, or did he have like proper clothing?
He had proper clothing. There's parkas that are worn by tradesmen in the north. We call them hydro parkas from the hydro workers. They're big green twill multi-layered coats. He had one of those on. He had wool pants, 2 layers of wool pants, decent boots, felt-lined boots. He had a toque. He had mitts. He had those big fur-lined mitts. You can open up the triggers on to be able to shoot with them with your mitts still on.
It doesn't seem like enough clothing if you're sleeping in minus 40 degrees. Like 2 pairs of wool pants, I don't think that would cut it. Surely wouldn't cut it for me.
No, I wouldn't want to try it either. It was documented in his diaries, and also people had encountered him during the wintertime, and he was just living off the land. So that's not an urban legend, that's fact.
I've watched a fair number of these videos on bushcraft, and what they're able to do in terms of how they can make fire, how they can build shelters just out of materials available from the land, and I imagine Oris, to survive -40, -50, he's got to have a source of heat if he doesn't have more clothing, more shelter than what he's got in that dog sled.
Well, they found this nest that he'd been in. He'd broken down a number of boughs off evergreens and made a bed for it. And then he had some poles over top where he had his tarp strung, but he'd taken the tarp with him. He had it done so he had 2 tarps, and there was a layer gap between the 2, which would provide an insulated value between them. So he knew what he was doing. I don't know whether or not Oris was taught or just learned it. He was crazy, and I mean that seriously. He's crazy. He's a schizophrenic of some sort, paranoid, but he wasn't dumb.
Yeah, for sure.
Completely adapted to his environment.
For sure. I'm going to show you something here on camera. I know it doesn't come out on the podcast, but I'll describe it and show it to you. So here's the physical proof. I've kept this as a sign to my own mortality that this is, where's the camera? If you can see that, can you see the primer dented? This is the discharged round, the British .303 round that killed my friend Bood. So that's it. Here's the 5.56 bullet that I shot, and it's the casing that I shot. It killed Oris. And here's the one that Oris had for me. If you can see that, can you see that the firing pin has punctured the round? But it didn't go off. It failed to go off.
Yes.
Notice the round, again, it's got a nylon tip in the bullet, which is a rather unusual round. It's got no military value and very little hunting value, so I'm not sure what the purpose is, but the remaining rounds Oris had on him, there were some still in the magazine box. They tested it at the lab, and all the rest of the rounds discharged. So this is the only one that didn't. So you've got the one before they had Bood discharged, the one for me didn't discharge, and the other ones were able to discharge just under normal functioning. So nobody can really explain why that happened, except for the First Nations people. There's a story that came out afterwards. You can take this to believe it. You can drop it in a soup pot, whatever you want. The Native people up there, their term for them now First Nations, Tlingit First Nations up there. They well knew about Oris for years. They were terrified of this guy. They wouldn't go out in their hunting grounds because they were scared of Oris. And they said, Oris is the Kushtaka. Oris, he's the wild man of the woods. He's possessed by a spirit. He tricks people, kills them, and steals their souls for his energy. That was the First Nations story behind it. Now, in the morning, just as we were suited up to get into the helicopters, an elderly Tlingit lady went into the police office in Teslin and talked to John, one of the corporal there. And she said, I'm coming to warn you that your warriors are in great danger. Oris is Kushtaka, and he's trying to trick them, kill them, and steal their souls. It was sort of, yeah, whatever. She said, I'm warning you.
Did this warning come in the morning of the day you all headed out to arrest Oris?
Yes. So in the aftermath of the investigation and tracking, it was determined that the previous night, Oris slept on an island called Shaman Island. And he took a vantage point at the north end of the island where he could see out over the lake back towards the Teslin region where he figured we'd be coming possibly on snowmobiles or an airplane. So he took a defensive position on the tip of the island, which is a really strategic spot. It's also the strategic spot where a Tlingit shaman from years ago by the name of Cash Clow was buried. That was his burial site. Oris slept on the shaman's grave that night before. And so the thinking is that, and you can take this for whatever you want, is that when Oris had gone so far, when he killed Bood, the shaman said, that's enough. We need to intervene and to stop it. So my bullet was stopped. So you can take the supernatural part for whatever you want. The business of my experience of feeling like, call it an out-of-body experience, that's so well documented in people that find extreme trauma coming at them. It's like the life flashing before your eyes when you see an accident coming. I explained that I just had a natural human reaction that gave me the clarity, the time to be able to react in the way I was. Plus, I'm also trained for it. It was fine. PTSD, I can't say that I developed PTSD. Sorrow, grief, fear, but not reoccurring. I've never had the flashbacks or the night sweats about this. For some reason, not this one. I just completely knew what happened, so there's no uncertainty here. Other than I have no idea. As I sit here, I cannot explain. And I know this is on a podcast and there's no cameras going, but I cannot explain why that happened.
Why that primer didn't go off.
Yeah, it punctured the primer. Sufficient denting in that primer that it should have ignited it. And it didn't.
Because you had things to do. You had more to do, Gary. That's why.
My FTO used to say, chance favors the prepared mind. And I think it was Louis Pasteur said that.
Chance favors the prepared mind. Isn't that good? I'm going to write that down.
But, I'd rather be lucky than good.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, right? So how do you happen to have all 3 bullets?
Let's call him Murray, was the lead investigator on this. He was also a friend of mine. Realized that the long term of this story, and he felt that I should keep these as a memento to my mortality, and also if I ever wanted to tell the story that was so that somebody say, yeah, you're right, the primer got hit and didn't go off. Yeah, sure it didn't. Well, here it is. And so I was recognized with an award from the Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is about as big a dog as it gets, for outstanding service for this thing. And I was presented the rounds at the award ceremony, and they handed it to me in a nice little box, and I've kept it ever since. Every once in a while I'll bring it out when I tell the story. But nobody can actually find the reason why that bullet was stopped.
No, in terms of taking a look at the firing pin impression on that primer, I mean, it hit. I mean, that went in good. So obviously, there's the whole spiritual side. I'm just thinking of it from just, the firearm side is, it was a bad primer, bad powder, old ammo, something along those lines. It's just, that's crazy. Do you have a defective primer from the factory that was inserted into the cartridge? If it's a very old round, sometimes you'll see failures like that, but that is a really good indentation in that primer. So, that shows he pulled the trigger and the gun was functioning. That is such an amazing set of circumstances for whatever reason that allowed you to be able to take Oris out.
Yeah. We're very fortunate that it wasn't worse. If he had got through me, Paul was a sitting duck. Now he's got 2 M16s with a couple hundred rounds of ammo. The team that was coming at him would have got mowed down. Just nasty. So whatever reason, I guess it wasn't my time to go, and I don't spend a great deal of time dwelling upon it. And I tell the story because it's a story that needs to be told. If it's going to be told, it's got to be told truthfully. And you can take what you want out of the First Nations aspect of it. They're very spiritual people. I'm not professing that I was saved by divine intervention. I just can't explain why that round was stopped.
I always say, like, if what we have here on this planet Earth, if this is it, if this is as smart as we get, if this is the best sentient beings can be, good God. So I do believe that there's such a thing as divine intervention. I do believe that things we can't explain happen and happen for a reason, sometimes for better or for worse. So I like that idea that the spirits of the First Nations said, okay, that's enough, and decided to intervene. I like that.
Yeah. And then years later, in trying to make some sort of sense of it, I wrote a book called No Witnesses to Nothing, which deals with partly about the Teslin Lake Incident and how it psychologically affected the people.
How did it affect you?
Well, it's a couple of years, Yeardley, before I could talk about it without shaking, sweating. I'm fine now, but I've spoke about it enough times. I got involved in the native sweat lodge culture, which was partly a healing thing. A medicine man who was a mentor on it, he said he completely bought into the passion that was the spirit of the shaman stopped him. See, folks, I'm really careful about buying into that part. But yeah, it was a number of years before I could really tell the story. I told it to other members so that they would have an understanding.
Let's talk about Bood a little bit. When did you first meet Bood?
I met him in the police office in Terrace when I first got there. He was coming out of the dispatch office. He was charming up one of the dispatchers. He was quite a ladies' man, a really good-looking guy, physically fit, built like a linebacker. Yeah, Bood, hard-drinking, hard-living guy. So he and I actually went on the first training course together. We were roommates, so we spent 5 weeks together and shared a bunk room. Got to be really close.
So it was just Bood and Trooper. Any wife, children?
Oh, he had a bunch of girlfriends. And then right at the end, he was actually living in my wife and my basement suite. So, and then not only did I have to go home and all of his stuff was there, that's a hard pill to swallow. And, your buddy's gone, he's never coming back. It's tough on us.
I just can't imagine what it's like going through his stuff after this incident.
Yeah. You don't forget a guy like that.
We always ask our detectives, when we ask somebody to come and be on the podcast, Dan or Dave, who vet the guests, say when the detective says, what kind of case should I talk about? We always say, talk about the one you're most proud of, or the one you can't forget, or the one that had an aha moment for you. And I think it's pretty obvious why this is one you'll never forget.
Yeah. Sometimes, folks, it's a bit therapeutic to talk about things like this. It really is. Especially when you're dealing with, a group of people who have got specialties like you do, your listening, understanding, and your backgrounds and in general life experience.
I've shared on previous episodes about an officer being murdered that I was present for. I know how hard it is to share these things, so I appreciate you being able to do that with us and trusting us.
Oh, yeah. It's a case where I still think it's somewhat therapeutic to tell the story.
Absolutely.
And Gary, I think by you telling the story, you're keeping the memory of Bood alive. He's somebody that I know about, and I know what your loss is like. I had a professional friend who was also killed in the line of duty, and I know it can be hard to talk about. So I appreciate you, stepping up and telling us the story.
Well, thanks, Paul.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Anytime.
Small Town Dicks was created by Detectives Dan and Dave. The podcast is produced by Jessica Halstead and me, Yeardley Smith. Our senior editor is Soren Bajan, and our editors are Christina Bracamontes and Aaron Phelps. Our associate producers are the real Nick Smitty and Aaron Gaynor. Gary Scott is our executive producer, and Logan Heftel is our production manager. Our books are cooked and cats wrangled by Ben Cornwell. And our social media maven is Monica Scott. It would make our day if you became a member of our small town fam by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Small Town Dicks. We love hearing from you. Oh, our groovy theme song was composed by John Forrest. Also, if you'd like to support the making of this podcast, hop on over to patreon.com/smalltowndickspodcast. There, for a small subscription fee, you'll find exclusive content you can't get anywhere else. The transcripts of this podcast are thanks to speech docs, and they can be found on our website, smalltowndicks.com. Thank you, Speech Docs, for this wonderful service. Small Town Dicks is an Audio 99 production. Small Town fam, thanks for listening. Nobody is better than you.